Howdy folks, it's Buster coming to you again. Today is July the 7th, it's my birthday. I finally made it to 71 years old. Never thought I'd made that far, but I reckon I did. Lulu's filming me over here. I just want to tell you about old Hired. You know, he's got that company over in Lubbock, Texas, and the boy he's one of the boys, but he kind of sponsors. Any way he can, helps us out. So that's Doug Home Construction Company in Lubbock, Texas. He's the best dirt man you ever seen now. But anyhow, appreciate him doing that. Got a little story today. It's a kind of a sequel to the last one we had on Little Dub's Wonder Cream. Name of this one's Bizness. And there'll be some more stories associated with this later on. But this kind of goes along with that. It's kind of a story made up from Little Dub's Wonder Cream. So here we go today. Of course, this is our Sunday story. Bizness. Well, Jesse and the boy done made up a plan to make some real hard cash when they met up after the ice cream social. Well, since Jesse done so good with Little Dub's Wonder Cream, and folks went so dang hog wild over it, he figured he could do even better with something for the women folk. But speaking of hogs, Walter done lost himself a parcel of money on them pork bellies. Fact is, the banknote he took out to buy 'em was due, and he had a heck of a time just paying it off. Them pork bellies fell flat on their pork butts, I'd say, when the market fell. Well, old Walter couldn't even afford to do no sparking with Lou Ann 'cause a hobo Sunday cost too much for him. Just to getting to where he could get a glass of water and a toothpick was too darn expensive. Well, Buster piped up and said them dang hogs was plumb dangerous like. His and Mama told him about her great uncle falling in a pen with a herd of hogs. Well, every fall the men folk would gather up all the hogs left to forage during the springtime and summer, and after they rounded them up and penned them, they'd select the ones for butchering for winter. They'd feed them out real good and get ready for the butchering and rendering lard and whatnot. A soap making and pork rinds and chitlins and smoked ham and bacon was to be made ready for the eating come first snow. Well, Buster's mama was a-coming back from milking when she seed her great uncle atop the first rail of the fence feeding them hogs. About that time he done got off balance, fell right smack dab in the middle of them hogs. Well, Buster's mama, her name was Lorraine by the way, run to the house a-hollering for help. They kept her back whilst the menfolk got in the pen and beat them hogs off of her uncle. Come to find out, them hogs done killed himself and ate him and even cracked his bones and ate the marrow out of him. Buster told she'd never forget that day. Wanted him to be real careful around them hogs, especially when he was a hog hunting, 'cause they got real mean like. Razorbacks was really bad, she said, and has tuskers that tear a man apart in no time and no quit in them. Well, that's a natural born fact, I'll tell you. Old Buster used to run them hogs down there in them bottoms down there on the river, just for the fun of it. Well, Jesse then told the boys what he see down on his and Grandpa's farm, Mississippi. That's M-I crooked letter I, humpback I, where he come from. His and Grandpa Esker was looking for that big old boar of his'n and couldn't find him nowhere. Well, Grandpa Esker called for Jesse and told them what he was a-doing and needed his'n help for a bit to find that there boar. Well, first off, they looked in the barn, and danged if and Jesse didn't see an old sow with piglets. She was a-munching on something, and Jesse wasn't quite sure what it was till he eased up on her. What he done seen would gag a gopher for sure. She was eating her own young'uns. Well, before she could get to another of them, Jesse reached into the pen and was a-getting piglets just as fast as he could. Well, that dang sow done turned on him and like to took off his hand and would have if he hadn't been a fast pulling it out of there. Skun up some, but 'tweren't nothing but a bit of a scare for Jesse. Well, Jesse's Grandpa Esker told him to be careful around them hogs 'cause they was real fractious like. Boy, that's something to see, I ain't a-lying. Done Buster's hog that way too. Eating them babies, Lord have mercy. He gave her to old man Rollins over there and let him eat him. Butchered him up. Anyway, that's a little sidebar there of what happened with Buster's hog. He had him for the FAA, for showing. But it was a sow. After that little fracas, they come on back up to the back lot, there sat that old boar. Jesse and his and Grandpa Esther both went to hollering and trying to get him to move. Well, that ornery cuss wouldn't even bat an eyeball. He just sat there stock still like one of them there statues you see at the park over in Jackson. Anyhow, Grandpa Esther told Jesse to stay back whilst he went in and shooed that old boar back up towards the barn. He done got him a gum pole and he went to hollering and shoeing that old boar. He just sat there, you know. Well, Grandpa Esther, he got a little bit upset with that hog, and he eased up on that old boar that dressed out about 450, 500 pounds, and poked him with that gum pole. Well, that boar never even moved a muscle. Finally, upset and all, Jesse's Grandpa Esther hauled off and kicked that boar, just kicked the plumb tar out of that doggone hog, and he just fell over. Well, you never see the like. There was a hole in the ground under that boar, and it appeared that he done sit down on that hole and couldn't get up. He was so darn fat that he got stuck there and plumb expired just to sitting in that hole. Boy, that was the dangest thing you ever did see. It ought to be in a movie reel. Well, back to the boys a trying to make some money. Well, Jesse ciphered that if he'd made women folk a special treatment for their skin, they'd make a fortune. Well, if all the boys pitched in and split the profits 4 ways, they'd save on labor, and each of them would make a right smart of a pocket full of change. He offered up how's he done so good on Little Dove's Wonder Crane, and if he could do that, well, they could do even better with this here idea of his. Now, I just want you to know, I said this before in a story, when Little Dove's Wonder Cream, it didn't say that he split his money with the boys, but he did. So I just want y'all to know he don't do nothing unless they all do it together. Well, Jesse went off to town to have a doctor look at his ingrowed toenail. His and Mama and 2 of her friends took him with them to a big department store there in Jackson when she come to pick him up to go home. He done seed a sight for sure there in the women's cosmetics department. There was women every which place. They was a buying all manner of lotions and creams to put on their face. But at one place, it was a counter-like thing, had women stacked up 7 deep to get that there facial mask, they called it. Some woman was a giving free treatments, and another one was a selling jars so fast you couldn't keep count. Well, Jesse listened up to what that one woman was a saying and why the others was a buying. Well, Jesse done got the idea that he could start with the facial mask stuff and build up a company with all manner of products. Seems as though the women wanted fresh, natural products like seaweed and cucumber and such. Well, we had big gardens ahead. We can get all we want of that, but the seaweed, we'd have to think on it. Well, Jesse hightailed back to the boys as soon as he got home. He hit the ground running. He told Buster to go down to his and Grandpa Gus's farm out on the bayou and gather as many persimmons as he could, both greenings and ripens. Now, Walter was to get his and Paul's kettle to dip hogs in after butchering, and Hired was to get them 6 cases of little blue jars he seed Mr. Leak throw out the trash behind the drugstore last night on the way home. Whatever it was in them little blue jars, they, oh Lord, they stunk worse than a skunk to high heaven, but Jesse figured they could clean them up real good, and they did. When everything was gathered up, he told Buster to write down exactly what they done to mix up a batch of Mother Nature's gift of youth. Jesse figured they'd start off with a little batch first and just add to it as they'd go till it was just right. Now, Buster squoze up 6 green persimmons. Now, green persimmons would make a body pucker up worse than alum. Then he squoze up 3 very ripe persimmons and added the juice to the other. Well, Hired got some clean gumbo and buckshot mud, about a pint each, and mixed that in. Well, Jesse had brung some clay from a clay bank out by the Grantham place and had a pint of that and mixed her up real good. Now, that stuff smelled good enough to eat, but Jesse knowed the trick was to see how good it'd dry up and pucker up a body's face. Well, Jesse remembered when the boys was on their trip and went through Idaho Springs, Colorado. The boys stopped at this Indian place with a cave that had the mud pit in it. What a feller did was jump into that mud, which was a mite warm, you know, and get it all over 'em. Then they'd sit down and let it dry. And after that, you jumped into a pool of water and washed it all off. Made a body feel real refreshing, so that's how the idea come to Jesse. Well, since Walter and Buster was kind of ruffled up a mite, cause all the tussling and all, cause you know that Walter was a trickster and he'd always wanted to tussle with Buster and see if he could get him, but he couldn't. Well, Jesse figured they needed to be the ones to test this here new concoction. Well, I took a good bit of doing to get them two to do that, but finally them greenbacks got in their eyes. Sure enough, kind of like a coon, you know, when it stuff gets in your eyes. Sure enough, it worked. Both Walter and Buster looked like a new penny and freshly scrubbed. About like getting ready to go to church on Sunday morning. Now, they was off to the races. They just kept on a-doubling the recipe till they got enough of them to fill them 6 cases of little blue jars. Now, Jesse knowed where Mr. and Mrs. Beatles moved off to Memphis and wrote them a letter and asked Mrs. Beatles to try a jar and see what she thought about it. Well, about 2 weeks later, Jesse got a phone call from Mrs. Beatles and said she was a-coming to see Jesse and his folks. Well, Jesse asked the boys over too and said their folks ought to come on in as well. Well, Mrs. Beatles come with a lady and a gentleman on the visit. They sat and visited for a spell and then got to the point of their visit. They wanted Mother Nature's gift of youth. Seems as though the lady was the wife of a man that owned some big department stores there, and the gentleman was a designer feller from France. They told the boys their product was the best they ever used and wanted some more of it. They offered them a deal of cash money and a percentage of each sale, but they had to know the recipe. Well, that was a bone to pick with Jesse, I tell you. Jesse, he just didn't want to tell them all how he done it. He knowed he could lose out some if and he did. The boys all had an idea of what should be done, but since it was Jesse's idea, he ought to call the shots. Those folks said they couldn't accept that and wished them well on their venture. Well, after those folks left on out, all the boys' parents had plenty of advice for them. They knowed how hard it was to make a nickel and survive in this old world, and all of them would have a real good start in life with that deal. Well, now Jesse stood right up and told all the parents that he knowed that, but he had to be true to his feeling, and that it just didn't feel right. If it starts out wrong, it's going to end up wrong. All 4 of the boys' mamas told the boys not to stop making it because they sure liked it themselves. All the boys' folks just let it be since it was their idea and deal, and they let the boys make their own way with it. About a month later, Joey Lauren Adams come by the church on Sunday. She and Mary Steenburgen was both in town for the holidays, and Buster knowed them both. Of course, the boys did too. But they went to church where Buster did, as people went. They was in the movies out there in Hollywood, but they was good gals, some good folks too. Well, Buster told them 2 gals he had something all the boys made up, and that might be something for them as far as keeping them young looking. Well, now they had another friend, that Nancy Shepherd. Oh, she's a sweet gal now. Buster knowed her all her life, school with her. Her people knew all of her brothers and whatnot, and her daddy, who did makeup for the stars that was from England, Arkansas. They all knowed each other, so they took her a jar too. Well, now it must have been nigh on 10 days after those gals left that Buster gets a call from Nancy. She tells Buster that Joey marrying her done tried that Mother Nature's gift of youth, and it did wonders for them all. Nancy said she even started using it where the other movie starred, men and women, and they wanted to buy all she could get. Well, Buster run to tell the boys what done happened and what Nancy said, and she sold all she got from them and was wanting more. Well, Buster and the boys called Nancy back and said they'd ship her about 5 cases. If she had other folks that wanted them, then she could sell it to them. Well, Nancy took them all and sent the boys a check. It was a heck of an event for them 4 boys to cash out their check and open up a checking account over at the First State Bank, where Buster's grandpa helped Mr. Bennett start it. He was selling watermelons off a wagon when Grandpa met him. All the boys started to make up a fresh batch the following week when this big black limousine come driving up. Feller got out with Nancy and he says his name is the Max Factor, and he was in the cosmetic business. He wanted to get as much of that there persimmon mud as he could get. Well, he got wind that some Revlon feller tried to buy us out, but we wouldn't sell. He said he would make any kind of deal we wanted so long as he got that there persimmon mud, Mother Nature's gift of youth, 'cause it surely did work. And it was Mother Nature's gift of youth. Well, all the boys was quite taken by this feller as being right smart and all, and not a pushing by no means. And Jesse up and said he'd take that deal. But Nancy had to get a commission for bringing him there. $1 million trust fund for each of the boys. $1 million split up between each of the boys' parents, and the distributor rights for this new store that was coming up, a place called the Walmart. Well, now, you know the boys knew old Sam Walton, and he's supposed to have been starting this store called the Walmart. Well, Mr. Factor took the deal right then and there. He wanted to see how we made up a batch after all the papers was signed, and they showed him. He was downright impressed and says he had to really keep this a secret now. The boys all swore they'd never tell and signed the paper swearing to it. Well, Nancy gave them all a hug and told them she never expected anything from them. Well, all the boys said it was only right, and they appreciated her confidence in them. She said it was the best product on the market, and no other one could even compare to theirs. She knowed them boys and their folks, and they was straight as a air like her people. Now, her daddy was a cabinet maker and a good one there in England. Good stock. Well, Jesse done it again now and hired up and says it was time for a vacation. And all of them and their folks ought to go. They all knowed each other and was like all family, which they really was. So they would have a high old time. The boys got all the folks together and they said how they wanted to go on the vacation. They ain't never been on no vacation though, you know. All of them said it was a dandy of an idea and they'd make kind of plans and schedule it for everybody's convenience. All the boys' parents told them how proud of them they was, but it was Walter that said that Jesse's idea was what made it all happen. Now, Jesse says that if it wasn't for all of them putting their 2 cents worth, he couldn't have done no idea like that. Well, after a favorite supper, all of them went home, excepting the boys who stayed over to Hires to talk over plans. Now, I ain't a-telling you what all Buster ate that night and what they had on the table, but it was sure enough a plenty. Was it Greece, or Italy, or Paris, France? Well, I don't reckon that rung any bells, but the time is coming soon to buy tickets. Guess we'll just have to wait and see what they come up with, huh? Well, Buster hollered out to Jesse, "Jesse, what's this there Walmart you done got us into? How'd you come up with that?" "Hold the line," he says, "hold the line." Y'all have a good day. Buster out.